Part 1 for Shadows of Power, The Rise and Fall of Los Zetas. Miguel El Tigre learned early that the world was neither kind nor forgiving. The streets around his home were narrow and littered with broken glass, the smell of smoke and decay hanging thick in the air. He was 10 when his mother died, leaving him alone in a neighborhood where danger whispered from every corner. Each day became a lesson in survival, and each night was haunted by the memory of her absence. He watched other children play, envying their laughter, but he had no time for innocence. Fear was a constant companion, yet it was a tool he learned to wield, a force that could be shaped into something useful. Every alley was a test of instinct, every glance from a neighbor a potential threat. He moved through the world with a careful awareness that life could shift violently in a single moment, and he would need to respond faster than anyone else to survive. Rafaela Lobo grew up under a different kind of pressure. Raised in a family of military men, he understood discipline and strategy from his earliest years, yet love and warmth were scarce. The structure of his childhood left him with clarity and focus, but also with hollows where empathy might have grown. By the time he reached adolescence, he had learned to assess risk, read faces, and measure every interaction against a potential cost. Authority shaped him, but it also left him with a quiet emptiness that he carried like a shadow behind his disciplined exterior. When Miguel and Rafael met, they recognized something in each other that neither had seen in anyone else. Both understood fear, loss, and the necessity of control. Their bond was immediate, rooted not in friendship alone, but in the shared instinct to survive in a world that demanded toughness and cunning. Together, they explored the margins of legality, first in small acts that seemed almost trivial to outsiders, a theft here, an intimidation there. These acts, minor as they seemed, left deep impressions, teaching patience, calculation, and the subtle art of manipulation. They learned that power could be exerted silently, that influence was as much about perception as action, and that cruelty, when controlled, could protect them from vulnerability. The first sanctioned acts of violence came later, and they were different. No longer simple tests of obedience, these acts were deliberate exercises in strategy and intimidation. Miguel watched his hands, once unsteady, move with precision as a rival was cornered. Rafael's eyes, trained to scan threats on battlefields, now measured reactions in every room, every street, every negotiation. They began to internalize fear, not for themselves, but as a weapon against others. Each act etched itself into their psyche, a permanent layering of morality reshaped to suit survival and ambition. Their pasts clung to them relentlessly. Miguel's nights were filled with memories of alleys, of the neighbor who had humiliated him, of the mother whose absence defined him. These images collided with the violence he now commanded, shaping each decision. Rafael, for all his control, experienced the world through the lens of anticipation and paranoia. Every hesitation by a subordinate, every hint of defiance, every rumor of betrayal became a potential threat demanding immediate response. Their minds were landscapes of calculation, obsession, and the ever-present pulse of danger. Even in moments of calm, the rituals persisted. They checked doors, reviewed routes, cataloged information, and rehearsed responses to imagined threats. Each gesture, each repeated behavior was a tether to control, a shield against the unpredictability of their environment. Outside, they projected authority and composure. Inside, they were meticulous, exacting, and quietly haunted. Their public image was one of dominance. Their private reality was a constant negotiation with every step into power accelerated their transformation. The first assassination they orchestrated was a milestone, both in skill and moral erosion. Each subsequent act of violence escalated naturally, building a rhythm of cruelty and control. The cartel provided weapons, status, and access, but also mirrored and amplified their deepest instincts. Fear became an ally, paranoia a tool, and empathy a distant memory. They learned to laugh at horror, to bond over brutality, and to read morality as a currency to be spent or ignored at will. By the time they realized the scope of what they were building, they were already beyond simple recognition. The streets had become extensions of their will, violence a language they spoke fluently, and survival dependent on absolute control. Shadows of their pasts flickered briefly, only to be smothered by strategy, ambition, and loyalty to each other. The first major raid they planned, A decisive strike against a rival was both a test and a statement, the moment when choice became destiny and the consequences of their childhoods were fully realized in action. As the operation unfolded, tension mounted. Men moved in silence, eyes flicking to corners, weapons ready, hearts hammering. Miguel's fingers lingered over the trigger, recalling the streets of his youth, the lessons of loss, the calculated precision learned over years. Raphael scanned, calculating, anticipating, controlling every movement with an almost preternatural awareness. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. And then the first shot rang out, shattering the stillness and marking the beginning of a descent into chaos that would define their lives forever, setting the stage for the next chapter of violence, power, and inevitable confrontation. Part 2 for Shadows of Power. The rise and fall of Los Zetas. The first crime that demanded their full attention was unlike anything Miguel and Raphael had faced before. The streets were heavy with the smell of dust and exhaust, the low hum of distant traffic punctuated by occasional shouts. The target was a rival lieutenant whose defiance threatened to fracture the fragile hierarchy Miguel and Raphael were building. The plan had been rehearsed meticulously for weeks. Every angle had been measured, every potential escape route considered, every response calculated. Yet anticipation carried its own weight, pressing against the chest, quickening pulses, sharpening awareness to a fine edge. Miguel checked the weapons again, each movement deliberate, each click of the magazine sliding home echoing in the quiet room. Memory intruded. The long nights of hiding from violence as a child, the empty streets where fear had taught him lessons in precision and timing. Now, those lessons became instruments of control. Raphael, eyes scanning shadows, measured positions of men and vehicles, rehearsing contingencies in his mind as if the entire world were a chessboard and every piece a potential threat. The quiet tension between them was a language of its own. A nod, a glance, the slightest shift of weight, communicating intent and readiness without a word. The operation began at twilight, when the fading sun cast long, jagged shadows across the alleys. Miguel moved first, a shadow among shadows, silent except for the rhythmic pulse of his own heartbeat. He caught sight of the rival lieutenant emerging from a doorway, unaware of the eyes tracking his every step. Raphael followed, maintaining distance, scanning his presence a silent guarantee that the plan would proceed uninterrupted. The lieutenant's confusion, the flicker of fear in his eyes, and the sudden realization that escape was impossible were all elements of a grim theater that Miguel and Raphael had orchestrated with meticulous care. In the aftermath, the quiet returned, yet it was a quiet heavier than any before. The echo of violence lingered in the alleys, in the air thick with dust, and within the men themselves. Miguel's fingers trembled slightly, a residual awareness of life taken, of morality bent, of innocence extinguished. Raphael's gaze swept the streets, noting reactions from the few who had witnessed fragments of the scene, cataloging them in the mental ledger that had become his constant companion. Both men understood that this act was no longer a test, it was a declaration, a proof that control was absolute and that fear could be commanded. The psychological impact was immediate and pervasive. Each kill, each act of intimidation, became a mirror reflecting the dark parts of themselves they had long tried to conceal. Miguel remembered the helplessness of his youth, the absence of protection, the moments when fear had left him powerless. Now power was in his hands, but it was tainted by the very trauma that had created it. Raphael experienced similar currents. Each calculated move, each life controlled or ended, reinforced both dominance and paranoia. The precision that had once been a tool of survival now carried the weight of ethical erosion, each act leaving faint, indelible scars that neither could fully acknowledge. The city felt different afterward. The hum of daily life continued, but there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken recognition of violence. Miguel and Raphael navigated the aftermath with care, noting who spoke too loudly, who lingered too long, who seemed to watch them with suspicion. Each encounter, each glance was a potential threat or opportunity, a reminder that power demanded constant vigilance. The meticulous planning that had once been preparation for survival now became a means of projecting inevitability, an assertion that they controlled not only events but perception itself. As nights bled into weeks, their confidence grew, and with it, a subtle yet inexorable escalation. Minor intimidation evolved into targeted attacks, calculated sabotage, and increasingly sophisticated strikes against rivals and informants alike. Their actions were no longer merely defensive, they became instruments of influence, shaping territories, alliances, and the balance of fear. Each escalation brought adrenaline, control, and moral corrosion in equal measure. The city became both stage and battlefield, and the men became architects of terror, constructing a web of influence that extended across streets, neighborhoods, and the minds of those who would challenge them. The first major act of violence, executed with precision and cold calculation, was now complete. It had achieved its immediate purpose, yet it also marked a critical threshold. The initial thrill of control mingled with the lingering residue of trauma, the shadow of fear that had always accompanied them. The dominoes were set. Each subsequent act would demand more skill, more risk, more moral compromise. The first crime was never an endpoint. It was the opening chapter of a spiral that would grow in intensity, complexity, and consequence. And as Miguel and Raphael disappeared into the shadows of the city, moving toward their next calculated move, a single truth became undeniable. The descent had begun. Part 3, For Shadows of Power, The Rise and Fall of Los Zetas. The city that had once trembled under their command now watched silently as Miguel and Raphael's empire began to crumble. Each corner they had once controlled, each shadow they had inhabited, now seemed fragile, exposed to the inevitable scrutiny of law enforcement. Surveillance cameras captured movements they thought invisible, informants whispered truths they could not ignore, and alliances they had relied upon shifted with the winds of fear and opportunity. The carefully constructed edifice of power, built on intimidation and control, began to show cracks that widened with each passing day. Miguel moved through his familiar spaces with a sense of calculated caution, noting exits and exits again, replaying every decision in his mind. He remembered the alleys of his childhood, the lessons learned from survival, yet these memories no longer served as shields. They were reminders of vulnerability, of the unrelenting weight of consequence. Raphael, ever vigilant, sensed the shifting patterns of loyalty and trust, the subtle signs that control was slipping. The same instincts that had allowed them to ascend now highlighted the fragility of their position. Tension became a constant companion, a quiet drumbeat behind every movement, every glance, every decision. The arrests came suddenly, like a storm breaking after long summer heat. Miguel was cornered in a safe house, the sounds of approaching vehicles and shouted commands shattering the stillness he had so carefully maintained. Raphael, simultaneously elsewhere, found his network compromised, allies disappearing or turning on him under pressure. Panic was momentary. It was replaced almost instantly by calculation, the same instinctual drive that had enabled years of survival now acting as a final, desperate measure. Yet there was no escaping the inevitability of the law, the cumulative weight of every act of violence, manipulation, and betrayal that had brought them to this moment. As the handcuffs clicked shut, a strange stillness fell over both men. The adrenaline that had fueled so many decisions ebbed, leaving room for reflection that was unavoidable. Miguel's mind flickered to his childhood, to absence, fear, and the hunger for control that had guided his choices. Raphael contemplated the hollow victories, the power wielded, and the moral cost exacted upon himself and others. In those moments of confinement, the empire they had built seemed simultaneously monumental and fragile, a monument to skill and a testament to human frailty. Even in defeat, the lessons of their rise persisted. Power had amplified their instincts, violence had shaped their perception of the world, and fear had been both weapon and companion. But the collapse revealed the limits of control, the inevitability of consequence, and the fragile nature of even the most formidable reign. As the city continued its pulse outside prison walls, the question lingered in the air, subtle but insistent. What transforms a human being into a figure of terror, and how much of that transformation is destiny, circumstance, or choice? The story closes not with a period, but with a doorway left open,